grandkids, how are you doing? I'm really excited to share with you from my dad's journal. This time it's about his mission to Hawaii. And I know most of you have been to Hawaii, so I think you love it like I do. So the first thing I want to tell you about is my dad was saying to go on a mission. He was really excited, but it was a little hard to leave his wonderful family. His father, if you remember, had been sick for many years with cancer. And so my father had helped earn a living for his family, and he'd helped raise his brothers and sisters because his dad was sick a lot. But he also went through a period of time where he got really well. He was being the bishop, and he was pretty healthy. And so my dad said, it was time. It was like the Lord opened a door for me to go on a mission. So he was so excited. His dad was healthy. He thought things had really turned around and that he had this opportunity to go on his mission. So he was super excited. But here's a little picture of his family. So here's his dad, Wilford Marsh Gurr Sr. Here is my dad, Wilford Marsh Gurr Jr. Here's his mother, Letha Edwards Gurr. And he was 10 months old, and he always called her my angel mother. He loved her. And he said, because of the gospel of Jesus Christ in our home, it made our home such a wonderful, safe, happy place. And he said that the scriptures and the gospel were just a main part, and they were filled. It just filled their home with so much goodness and love. And he said because of the gospel and that happy home, it was hard to leave his family. But he was really excited for his mission. And he said his dad at the time was a bishop, and he was also the deputy sheriff in Nevada. And he wore a badge like this. And while he was the bishop, he filled out my dad's mission papers and sent him into the church. And not long after, a couple weeks after, he got his mission call to the Hawaiian Islands by our prophet, Heber J. Grant. So here's a picture of Heber J. Grant. And he got that mission call to the Hawaiian Islands, and he was so excited. And at that time, they didn't have the MTC in Provo, where the missionaries would go and learn the language. They had a mission home in Salt Lake City. So he went to the mission home in Salt Lake City, and his parents drove up there and dropped him off. And there were a lot of sister missionaries and elders. Well, not a lot. There's a few. And this was the mission home, and they were super excited to learn the language. But they only had 1 week. So they're supposed to learn the language and learn about the gospel. And he was set apart as a missionary by Brother Merrill. And Brother Merrill taught him a lot and gave him good advice and helped him learn about what a mission was like and what he would be expected to do. And he said he loved his counsel. So that was the mission home. And then he got on a train and went to San Francisco, California. He got to go on this train. Wouldn't that be super fun and cool? So he got on a train, and he took the train to California with 8 elders. There was 8 of them total. And then when they got to California, to San Francisco, there was a World's Fair going on at that time. A World's Fair was where different countries would come and make exhibits and pavilions, and they would rotate every 5 years to different countries and have these big, wonderful parties or fairs, and they would build buildings and they'd make them beautiful and big. And this one was called Treasure Island. And they had beautiful buildings and rides and food and exhibits to go see things from other countries and learn about technology. So here's a picture of the World's Fair in San Francisco. And this is in 1939 or 1940. And you can see the beautiful buildings that were built and the water features. And he said it was a lot of fun. They got 3 days to go through the World's Fair. Wasn't that fun for missionaries to get to do that? And then after that, they boarded on a beautiful ship called the Matsonia. And he said it had really big engines on this ship. And it pushed him so hard and far, this big ship, all the way across the Pacific Ocean to Hawaii. And he said, here's an actual picture of the Matsonia. Isn't that amazing? And he said, and this is Honolulu where they landed, but he said it had these big engines and it pushed them past and underneath the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Can you imagine building a bridge that goes this far over the water? They had to, it was an architectural feat. It was such a hard thing to figure out how to build, and they figured it out, and he got to see it. And it's there today, and many of you have probably seen it, but it's beautiful. He said it was so fun being on the ship. They went on the ship for 5 days and 5 nights till they got to Hawaii. He said it was so much fun because they had a swimming pool and shuffleboard, and they could swim. And as missionaries back then, you could swim. And they played ping pong and games, and they had the greatest time. And they had nice little cabins. And he said they had like a guy that was a maid for each room. And he said he would draw your bath. He would run your bath for you. He'd bring you food anytime you wanted it. Pull your blankets down to go to bed. They took care of you like a king. They pampered you like a king. And my dad wasn't used to that. He was from a really poor family. Most people were very poor back then. And he said it was just so much fun because the food was like a banquet for a king. He said they had all these fruits that he'd never seen or heard of, all these vegetables, all these meats and fruit, cheeses and delicacies, all these like fancy food he'd never seen before. And he was like, I just couldn't believe this food. And he goes, we didn't have to eat it just for breakfast and lunch and dinner. We got to eat it anytime we wanted. And we just tell our steward, bring this food and this food. And he said the food was just amazing. And he gained 25 pounds in 5 days. 5 days up, 5 pounds a day. He said he went up to 175 pounds in 5 days, the highest he'd ever weighed. He said on the very last day on the Mastonia, this beautiful ship, they had all of them taste a really popular Hawaiian dish called poi, made from taro root. And it's kind of like a purple sweet potato. And we had some while we were in Hawaii. Some of you might have had it, and it was good. We liked it. But he did not like it. He said it was terrible. And he said it took him a long time to eat it. And he just didn't like it at all. So, but he was prepared for when he got to Hawaii and he would have to eat poi. He said as the big ship Mastonia was pulling into Hawaii, he said he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The island was the most gorgeous green jungle of the most exquisite colors of green, and the waters were the most varied colors of blue and turquoise and just gorgeous, and the sandy beaches. He'd never seen anything like that. He'd never swam in the ocean. He'd never traveled far like this. And he said he thought he was coming into the celestial kingdom. It was so beautiful. He came from Kaliani. There was a little desert town with hardly any trees, and the bushes were some straggly bushes and a little bit of straggly grass. He said it was nothing like this. And Beaver, Utah, and Buckhorn, Utah, no, it wasn't beautiful like this. And this is what he saw. These beautiful turquoise waters, these beautiful green jungles that were lush. And he thought he was in heaven. He kind of was. It's pretty heavenly there. But when the 8 elders arrived, they were pulling into the dock, and what they saw when meeting them was so exciting. There was all these people on the dock to greet them. The mission president and his wife, President and Sister Cox, the district leader, Elder Williams and his companion. There were lots of elders, lots of sisters, lots of ward branch members, and they all had leis, and were putting all these beautiful flowered leis on them. And thank you for coming, elders. We love you. We're so grateful. And he said they made them feel so good when they landed in Hawaii. And he said, first of all, they took them to a point called Diamond Head. And it was at the top of this beautiful volcano, and they got to overlook the ocean. And my dad said he thought he could see almost all the Hawaiian Islands, and there was like 5. There's like Molokai and Oahu. This was on Oahu, and Kauai and Maui, and I can't remember what the other one is, but there's all these beautiful islands, and you could see them dotted out in the ocean. And he said it was so beautiful, he couldn't believe it. And then Elder Williams took him to a beautiful mountaintop called Pali. Do you remember the Nepali coast? And Josh and Crystal hiked the whole thing, and some of us hiked part of it. And it was so beautiful on Kauai. Well, this is called Pali Mountain, not Nepali, Pali. And he drove him up to this beautiful Pali Mountain. And he said there was a cliff that was 1,500 feet deep. And when they were up at the top looking over, the wind was almost to push them off. It was so strong. And he said that Elder Williams told them a story about a Hawaiian princess that was trying to run away from her enemies. And she ran and jumped off the cliff. But the wind gently sat her down. It was so strong, and it took care of the Hawaiian princess, and she was fine. But of course, that was just a myth, but it was a fun story. And then after they took these elders, my dad, and they took him to Laie Temple. It's the most beautiful Hawaiian temple. And Grandpa and I got to go, your grandpa, my husband, Steve, we got to go at the beginning of January, no, the end of January, to the Laie Temple. And here is a picture of it. This is where my dad went. I wasn't 100% sure that he went there, but I thought he did. But I wasn't 100% sure, but he said when he saw this temple, he said it was the most beautiful white temple with the most green mountains behind it, and lush trees and bushes and beautiful ponds and beautiful fountains. And he said he just couldn't believe how beautiful it was. And as we know, part of it was the spirit that was touching his heart. The spirit was so strong at this temple. When Steve and I went to this temple at the end of January 2020, we were coming home from Kauai, and we were on a bus, and it was taking us by the temple. And we were so excited to see it. And it was starting to get dark, kind of like that picture. And there were all these beautiful lights lining the way. And we were on this bus with all these people from all over the world. They were like France, Korea, Japan, all over the world. And we're on this bus, and a lot of people don't even know about Mormon temples or Latter-day Saint temples. We pull around, and we're all clamoring to get out to go and walk up closer and walk around and go to the visitor center. And we come around the corner, and I see it, and it's bright white, and it's the most stunning thing I'd ever seen. I really think of my whole life. And I don't know what happened to me. My eyes filled with tears. Something happened to me very unusual. And I could hardly breathe. And I got off the bus and was walking on the sidewalk. And all of a sudden I got to where I couldn't talk. I was so overcome with the spirit. It just washed over me. I've never had this happen in my life. Never. It was so strong and so deep in my chest and heart, I couldn't talk. And Steve, I didn't know I was looking weird or anything, and I was just walking towards where all the people were walking. And Steve came walking up really fast behind me. He said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And I thought, oh, he could tell something was going on. But he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't answer him. And I've never done that in my life, never. And he asked me again, and I finally told him. I said, "I'm overcome with the spirit. I couldn't talk." And that had never happened to me before or since. And it was one of the most special, sweetest times where heaven reached down and touched my heart in the most powerful way. Never had anything like that. I can't even explain it. It was so unusual and so beautiful, but that building has something really special there. And I don't know if it was like my dad got to come and be near. I don't know what it was, but something happened really special there. Okay, so after he went to the La'i temple, they took him to the mission home. And the mission home was an old Hawaiian mansion. They had lots of beautiful old Hawaiian mansions around. And this one, they had the mission president's family there. They had some training there. They had some rooms for the elders to sleep in. And here was an old Hawaiian mansion to give you a little feel. And look at the old trees that had those big tall roots that came out. Isn't that beautiful? And he said, as they were walking through this beautiful mansion, there were all these rooms that had ropes that wouldn't let him walk past these ropes. And it was like half the room would be roped off. And he's like, why do they have all these ropes on all these rooms? And they said, it's because there are termites, these little bugs, bigger than an ant, that come and eat wood. And they eat it all day long. And they multiply and make thousands and thousands. They can destroy a home, these termites. And there were so many termites that had eaten the whole floor away, except varnish, which is the clear coat, the shiny coat on top of wood. They ate the wood up to the varnish and left a little bit of wood that was hooked into the varnish, so it looked like a wood floor with varnish. But they said, if you step on that, you'll fall clear through to the second floor. So they're like, don't step past these ropes because there's no floor under it because of the termites. He said he thought that was such a crazy story. So the mission president, President Cox, talked to my dad and shared with him some of his thoughts and what his mission could be like, and was inspiring him, and then told him who his new companion was, Elder Worley. And my dad was so excited. He loved this Elder Worley when he met him, and he assigned him to Nanakuli, which is a little town that was 40 miles north of Honolulu. There's Nanakuli. That's an old picture of Nanakuli. It might have been right when my dad was going there. But he said the mission home was beautiful, and right across the street from the mission home was the ocean. And he said in that day, missionaries didn't have many strict rules. And so he was able to go every day and go swim with his companion. And so they could swim every day, and it was totally fine. So they went to Nanakuli, and every day they'd go work so hard on their mission. They would walk 10 miles a day, he said, to all these homes far out. And he said they would work with members and they'd work with new people. And he said a lot of people didn't really want to hear the gospel. They didn't want to hear anything, and they were content and happy. And he said, but he goes, he said that the members were so good to them and helped them. And there was a branch president named Kama Keokalani. Got to show you this name. It's a crazy name, so I typed it out for you to see. Kama Keokalani. And then there was the Fisher family too that were so good to him. And they were a Haole family. Haole, look how you spell that. Haole means white American family. And so and then his companion was Elder Worley. But I just had to show you that. But they treated him so good. They fed him. They would take him places. But the elders would work super hard and walk many miles every day, 10 miles. He said we'd be so tired. It was so hot. But I might need to open up a light a little bit. It's getting so dark in here. Hopefully that's enough. I can turn on the light too. So anyway, this family was super, super good to him, both these families. And then, one day, Elder Worley, they had worked so hard all day, and he came back and he said, okay, we're going to go swimming. They hiked about 2 miles down, and the waves looked pretty big. And he'd never been in the ocean before, my dad. And he said, so what you have to do is you have to dive under the big waves. Well, they were not using good reason. The waves were too big. They were 20 foot, really close up. And so he went in, my dad went in, and he said, I went face down into the dirt. The 20-foot wave mashed him so hard. He said, I was sure it broke my neck or my back. And he said it hurt so bad. And he went tumbling end over end. He said, I thought my arms got pulled off, my legs got pulled off. He said it was such a terrible thing. And it took him forever to get out of that. And Elder Worley had the same experience. And afterwards, when they were finally able to get out of that, there were people on the shore, and they went up, and the people said, we've just had 2 sailors that got pulled out of there and transported right now in an ambulance, both of them with broken backs. And it was really great blessing. They were protected, but he had to learn about these scary waves, and they learned it in a rough way. And then, so this is a picture of the big waves. And then he said, because they would walk so far every day, their president felt really bad for them. And so their mission president bought them bikes, each a bike. And he said they loved their bikes so much. So this is a bike from the 1940s. And so it would look something like this. And he said that he and his companion would ride their bikes they could now go 20 miles instead of 10 a day. So it was a great blessing to have those bikes. And then he tells about how another time, let's see if I can get this right. He said at the end of the day, he said they'd been teaching all day. Oh, I wanted to tell you this story first. Okay, that's after the 20-foot waves. That was the second day he was there that happened. The third day he was there, he said he went up in the mountains behind their house, and he sat alone in a little place that didn't have any houses or people. And he said he was really sad and alone. He said he felt like he almost got killed. It was really frightening for what happened to him, and it was terrifying. And he said he looked out across the ocean and he thought, how am I ever going to get back to my family? I'm on this little island. They're thousands of miles away. I feel so alone and I miss them so much. And I was almost killed. And it was hard. It was hard. But I think it's good for us to understand, even my dad, who I thought was just the most strong spiritual giant, he grew into those beautiful testimonies and faith and strength through him facing hard things too. And he said he felt so alone, and he really wanted to go home at that night, and he felt very homesick. He said he'd felt very homesick. So he'd been away from home quite a while, because he'd been at the mission home, he'd been in San Francisco, he'd been on that trip across the ocean. So he'd been gone a while, and it really hit him. But as he prayed, and then he said over the next few weeks, they worked really hard, and they helped so many families learning about the gospel. And he said that turned it all around. He loved it. He just started loving his mission. Once he was able to teach about Jesus and testify and be a real missionary and love the gospel and share the gospel, it turned his heart around, and he was excited to be there. Well, then not very long after that, they came home after a really hot day, and it was starting to get dark. And he said every night they would run across the street, go swim for just a little while, cool down, and go back. And this night, it was starting to get dark. They didn't really look at the waves like they should have, like they did that first night. And the waves were huge, and they shouldn't have gone in, and they did. So here are some waves in the dark that are pretty big. He said these waves washed them out about 100 feet. It was a rip tide. They couldn't get back in. He said for over an hour and a half, they fought the waves, and it dragged them south to a coral reef where it hit them into the coral. Coral is like little sharp shells and rock. and it just scraped them up. They were bloody. They kept trying to hold on to each other, but every wave would just rip them apart. And they were praying. They were trying so hard to get back to the shore. There was no way. And after about an hour and a half, they got to a part of the reef where they were able to pull out of that riptide and able to get back to the shore. And he said, you know, they had another tough lesson with that. He said they didn't have to pay very much for their mission. It was $35 a month. But even then, by the end of the month, often they ran out of money. And so he said there was a lot of fresh fruits on the side of the road that was growing wild. And that's what they would live on the last week of the month because that's all they had. He said some of the things that they would live on were mangoes, avocados, and pineapple. He would take an avocado. He taught me this when I was a little girl. He said when he was in Hawaii, he would cut them in half, pull the pit out, fill the hole up with ketchup, and eat it with a spoon right out of the shell. And so we used to do that when we were little, and we loved it. It was so yummy. Try it sometime. Take the pit out, fill the hole up with ketchup, and eat that whole thing with a spoon. Super yummy. Then he got transferred to Kona. Kona was on the west side. It was the dry side of the island. And he said that, this doesn't look very dry, but this is supposed to be Kona. So he said that he became the branch president there and the district president. And he was over 5 missionary sets. Maybe he was just the district president, but I think he said he was the branch president. He was at a branch meeting and they asked him to pray for rain. They hadn't had rain for days and days and days and days and days. The way they took showers and got water in this town of Kona that was so dry was they had a big bucket on top of their roof and it would fill with the rainwater. And then they had pipe that went out to a shower outside, a little wooden shower, and would go down in their house and they had to drink this water. And he said, so he had to pray for this branch to get water. They had no water, so they had nothing to drink. They had nothing to shower. They couldn't take hardly any showers. So he said he was really nervous and he thought, oh, I can't pray for that. And if I do and it doesn't happen, they won't trust me anymore. So anyway, he got up there, started to pray, and all of a sudden he had the strongest impression, pray for rain. And he did. He said he prayed that it would rain and rain for Kona and on this area. And he was like, oh, what did I just do? And then afterwards, people were coming up and going, why did you do that? There's no way. And he said he felt so bad. And then the next day, he said he was still feeling bad about that. And he knelt down to pray for rain. And he said, as he knelt down and was praying, it just started raining. And he was so thankful. So here's a bucket to show how when it rained, they would fill their buckets on their roof, and that was what they would drink. And that's what they would take their showers with. And he said so here would be like a shower coming down. And he said often there'd be these little worms all over in the water. And he said, so they would put like a fabric net over the tap so that the water would come out with all those worms in it. And he said sometimes the worms would clog it up, and if they didn't change the cloth often, it would start tasting like the worms. And so he said you had to change that really often. And he just said it had a terrible taste. He said it's a miracle we didn't die from sickness. And then he said when they would take showers, they'd have to take a flashlight out at night because if it was dark, on the outside shower, it's just a little box of wood and a wooden floor. They'd take their flashlight, shine it on the floor, and there'd be hundreds of scorpions that go shoot, shoot, every time. He would just go, oh. And he said then they would take their shower, but the scorpions would run from the light. So here's the scorpion, what a scorpion looks like. And he said there would be hundreds. It'd be terrible. So thank goodness for flashlights. He said that there was a beautiful inn nearby called, now I can't remember the name of the inn, but I think it's Kona Inn, and it had a swimming pool. And he said the manager loved Mormons and he let them swim in all they wanted. And here's a little picture of Kona Inn. And he said, I was able to find an old one. And he said that there was this swimming pool, and it actually was kind of up on a cliff, and it had pipe around it, 2-inch pipe, and 2 feet apart, another 2-inch pipe. And he said they would go swimming in there, and they had so much fun in that pool. And he said one time the waves were coming washing up in the pool, and they thought it was super fun and super cool off this cliff. And he said they would grab onto the pipe on this side, and the wave would throw them to the pipe on this side. They'd grab on the pipe on this side, hold tight, and the waves would wash them over to the other side. And he said, at first we thought it was so fun and so cool. And pretty soon a monster wave came in and almost sucked them through the pipe. And he said, we were barely holding on, and we knew, okay, that is so stupid. And they got out. He goes, we finally got smart about it. But his companion, Elder Worley, I wanted to tell you, was a really good tennis player. And this is where my dad learned to love to play tennis. You know how my dad played tennis? He played it almost every morning my whole life, Monday through, I'd say Friday. He'd go to BYU at 5 in the morning, and he would play tennis. He just loved it so much. But it started in Hawaii. His companion, Elder Worley. And he said one time they were tracking, and they ran into the richest girl in the world. And her name was something Cromwell. I think it was like, what was her name? I think it was Doris Duke Cromwell. Richest girl in the world. And she was dating Errol Flynn, a movie star. And Errol Flynn played tennis, and they were teaching him about the gospel, and he wanted to play tennis with Elder Worley because he was so good. He was a champion at Utah State University and a really good tennis player, and so he said sure. So they went and played tennis, and Elder Worley beat Errol Flynn, this movie star, many times, but they got to teach him about the gospel. So here's a picture of Doris Cromwell and Errol Flynn. And this is when they were in Hawaii, and this is them also. And so that was kind of a fun story. And here he is right here, Errol Flynn. He was a tennis player. Okay, there's Dynamite you're seeing. Okay, so my dad was asked by the mission president to redo the mission home, and they had solid rock that they had to blast through for the sewer lines. And my dad had used dynamite in a mine in Kaliani, so he knew how to do it. He was also a painter. He knew how to do a lot of construction. So he did all the painting, all the puttying of the walls, made it beautiful, redid this mission home. It took him about 3 months, did the blasting with the dynamite for the sewer tank, and made this beautiful home, mission home. He painted his room an emerald green, and he loved this emerald green room. He said it was the prettiest room he'd ever seen, and he painted the floor gray. Now, this is a picture of an emerald green room from the olden days, but this was not my dad's room. But I just wanted to show it to you. My dad loved kind of vibrant things like this, and I thought it was cute. I got to speed this up. I'm taking too long. My dad was also called to serve on Parker Ranch, which I think it's still on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's thousands of acres big. It had thousands of head of cattle, beef cattle on it. It had 100 employees, and they were serving at this Parker Ranch. And it had horses, and there were members of the church that would let them ride their horses to get to the little villages that were going up the mountain by Parker Ranch. Parker Ranch was beautiful. Here's a picture of my dad with a horse on Parker Ranch. I thought that almost looked a little like Caden. I don't know why. Maybe I see Ryan, Caden, and Josh in there somewhere. Isn't that cute? So my dad loved riding horses. He was good with horses. But anyway, so here's a picture of the snow-capped mountains behind Parker Ranch. And that was really unusual to have snow-capped mountains. So anyway, that was beautiful. And he said one time they gave him a horse that was so huge. He'd never seen anything this huge. He said he couldn't even reach the horn on the saddle to lift himself up. It was so high. He had to stand on something to get his foot in the stirrup. And I got you a picture of a big horse to show you how that probably felt for my dad. So my dad had to take this horse up the mountain to see a little branch and help him teach this little branch. So he and his companion went up, and he said the horse was great. It was good. It just galloped along. They got up the mountain, got to visit with the people. Just the best people. He said they were so amazing. He says when you turn the horse around to go home, there's this thing that horses do when they go home. Not all horses, but some horses. They take off running and they can't stop till they get home. We had a horse like that in Florida named Sugar Bear. We would take him on a ride. He was so sweet and nice. And when we turned him home, he acted like he didn't have anything like a bit in his mouth. And you would pull those reins so hard and he'd throw his head back and spit all over you. And he would run so fast home, you had no control of him. He was wild out of control. Well, that's what happened to my dad on that giant horse. He said it was probably going about 50 miles an hour, and they went 8 miles down this treacherous mountain. He said it was just leaping over boulders that were the size of small cars and small trees and big gullies and ditches. He said he wasn't even staying on the trail. He was just flying down this mountain. And my dad said, I was just praying and holding on with everything I had. He said he would not he wouldn't stop with any amount of pullback I had. And he said he was running so fast, and he finally came to this big fence that was made out of timber, big wood pieces. And he says, I thought he's going to break his neck. He's not slowing down. And he slammed into that fence, and my dad went flying, he said, for another 50 feet. And he said it was a miracle both of us didn't break our necks. And he said they were both okay. But he said it was the most terrifying ride of his life. Here's another cute picture of him. And I think this is around Parker Ranch. I'm not sure which companion this is, if it's Elder Worley. But isn't that cute? Is he just so adorable? I just love my dad. Okay, and then I only have a couple more pictures. We're almost done. Then on December 7th, I think it's 1941. Oh, I didn't tell you about that. Oh, that's what I was going to tell you. So in a gymnasium in the mission home, so a gym where you play basketball, my dad was standing on a chair trying to put a new net on a basketball hoop, and all of a sudden the chair just jerked out from under him. He grabbed on the hoop, a big earthquake hit, and it was just swaying. And then he said every 2.5 minutes another earthquake would hit, and they would just time it. And he said even at night, their beds were on these wheels, and they were on wooden floor, and he said the beds would just sway and roll all over. And he said it was terrifying at first, but they got so used to it, they could even sleep through it. And he said those earthquakes went on for 3 days, and they were really big. So that was crazy. Then he was at Sacrament meeting on December 7th, 1941 at 10 a.m. And all these soldiers came running in, U.S. soldiers. Get out of here, get home. The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor, and we suspect they're coming to bomb here. Get in your homes. Don't turn any lights on when it becomes dark at night. Leave them off, because they'll have a target to bomb you. So he gave, so here's a picture of Pearl Harbor before it was bombed. Here's Pearl Harbor being bombed. Here's some of the big aircraft carriers. They had like 80 big warships, and they had submarines, and they had aircraft carriers, and they had such a big fleet. It was such a surprise when the Japanese just came and bombed them. Terrifying. That was the beginning of the war. And so my dad was, they gave him a gun called I forgot the name of that gun. I wanted to tell you the name of that gun, but it's something like a grenadine. Something like a grenadine. And I'll give you show you a picture. See, that's what it is, a grenadine. And they said, here, learn how to do it. This is how you do it. He'd never shot one of these. They showed him how. Go sit up in this little watchtower. If anyone has a light on, you call us on the phone. And then they would go to that house and tell them, turn out their lights. They didn't want any targets for the Japanese. So he had to do that, and he stayed awake all night guarding and looking over for any lights. And he would call him, and then all of a sudden that light would go out, and then that light would go out. He said also, as they would walk along in this one dry area, there was no water to drink. And he said, but there were acres and acres of pineapple. And he said they would just open a pineapple and drink it. He goes, it didn't help with their thirst as much as water would, but it helped enough. And so they would drink pineapple. I thought that was a beautiful pineapple field. And then lastly, there was a leper colony on the island of Molokai where he went and served down in the leper colony. The only way to get down these sheer cliffs to where the lepers lived, leprosy is a disease that my dad said their fingers would fall off, their nose would fall off, their skin would fall off. And it would be like a mom from one family, a child from a different family, a dad from a different family. All these people would come to this colony, and they were kicked out of their towns. And they all had to live in this colony with other lepers. So they all became each other's family because they had to leave their families. And so the church had a little chapel down there, a little mission home. But the only way to get down these steep, steep cliffs of Molokai was on a mule. So here's the mules going down to Molokai. And it was on a skinny, narrow trail down to the leper colony. And my dad was able to teach them. And he said they had the strongest testimonies. Here's the leper colony of Molokai in 1941. Look at those steep cliffs. And in the church, Dad said they had a rope that the lepers had to stay on that side and the healthy people were on this side, so the missionaries. And he said it made us so sad to have that rope. And he said, but they loved the gospel. They loved learning about Jesus. It was their hope. It was their joy. And it meant the world to them to have the missionaries. They loved them. They loved the leaders. And he said they loved serving in Molokai. And then he got on the big ship to head home. And this ship was called U.S. Troop Carrier SS Mount Vernon. And I got an actual picture. And this is what they rode home. At the end of his mission, he got to go on this ship. And this ship was a carrier, so it was an army ship. And he said it hit one of the worst storms in Pacific history. And he said 40 of the cars and trucks that had been tied down with big chains washed overboard. And he said the ship had to go in a zigzag all night long with no lights on, because there were submarines that would torpedo them if they were caught. There were planes. They had to be so careful because it was wartime. So my dad said it made him all really sick. He was so happy to get to Los Angeles. They landed in Los Angeles, and he was so happy to get home and see his family again. He just loves his family, but he loved his mission. It was the greatest. He said the opportunities it gave him and the growth and the testimony and the faith he built, that was such a treasure to him. And then to be home with his family again was so exciting. I hope the Spirit's touched your heart with how precious our testimonies are, and that we have to remember them, and that our ancestors did hard things, and we can do hard things too. I love you.